The dust hung thick in the air as Winona Fairchild watched the silhouette of her husband disappear over the horizon, taking with him their life savings and the last shreds of her dignity. Her trembling fingers clutched the deed to their failing ranch outside Fort Smith, Arkansas, a worthless piece of paper now that the spring of 1876 had brought nothing but drought and desperation to their land. The stillness of the moment shattered when the bank manager cleared his throat behind her. "Mrs. Fairchild, I'm afraid we'll need to discuss foreclosure options." Winona stood frozen on the weathered boardwalk of Fort Smith's Main Street, the afternoon sun beating down on her shoulders. 3 years of marriage to Vernon Mills had culminated in this, abandoned in a town where she knew few people, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a wedding ring that suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "He said he was just going to Wichita," she whispered, more to herself than to the impatient banker beside her. "Said he'd be back with new breeding stock by week's end." The hollow feeling in her chest expanded as she admitted the truth she'd been denying for months. "He's not coming back, is he?" The banker, Mr. Atwood, shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Fairchild," she corrected automatically. She would never answer to Mills again. "My name is Winona Fairchild." At 24, Winona had already weathered more storms than most women twice her age. Orphaned at 16, married at 21, and now abandoned at 24. The frontier had promised so much opportunity, freedom, a chance to build something lasting. Instead, it had taken everything. "You have until the end of the month," Atwood said, tipping his hat before retreating back into the bank's cool interior. Winona stood alone as townspeople hurried past, averting their eyes. News traveled fast in Fort Smith. By nightfall, everyone would know Vernon Mills had abandoned his wife and fled with money that wasn't his to take. "Looks like you could use a drink." The deep voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to find a tall man leaning against the hitching post beside her, his face shadowed by a worn Stetson. Dust clung to his denim pants and leather vest, but his blue eyes were clear as mountain water beneath the brim of his hat. "I don't drink with strangers," Winona replied, straightening her spine. The man pushed himself off the post and extended a calloused hand. "Preston Foster. I run cattle on the North Ridge, not a stranger anymore." When she didn't take his hand, he shrugged and let it drop. "Suit yourself." Preston Foster. She'd heard the name whispered in town. A solitary rancher who kept to himself, known for fair dealings and a steady hand with a gun when needed. Nothing like Vernon, whose charm had hidden a gambler's desperation. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Foster." Winona turned to leave, though she had nowhere to go. "Not offering pity, madam, just coffee." He nodded toward the cafe across the street. "And maybe some advice about those 30 head of cattle Vernon left behind." Winona's steps faltered. "How do you know about the cattle?" "Because I sold them to him last spring. And I know he didn't pay what he owed to Jebediah Morris for the grazing rights on the south pasture." Preston's expression remained neutral. "Those cattle might be your only chance to settle some debts." Suspicion crawled up her spine. "What's your stake in this, Mr. Foster?" "No stake. Just don't like seeing honest folks get buried by another man's mistakes." He gestured toward the cafe again. "Coffee's getting cold." Something in his steady gaze made Winona reconsider. She'd trusted too quickly before, but right now she had few options and fewer friends. "Just coffee," she agreed cautiously. The cafe was mercifully quiet at mid-afternoon. They sat at a corner table, steam rising from thick ceramic mugs between them. Preston removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years under the open sky. "How bad is it?" he asked without preamble. Winona stared into her coffee. "Bad. Vernon took our savings. The ranch mortgage is 3 months overdue. And apparently he borrowed from half the merchants in town. Preston nodded slowly. Those 30 head could settle the most pressing debts if you sell now. I don't know the first thing about selling cattle, Winona admitted. I do. Preston set his mug down decisively. I'm driving 200 head to the railroad at Fort Gibson next week. I could include yours for a fair percentage. Winona studied him, searching for the catch. Why would you help me? Because this territory's hard enough without vultures circling every misfortune. His expression darkened. I've seen too many good people lose everything because one hand of cards went wrong. Vernon didn't gamble, Winona said automatically, then paused. At least I thought he didn't. Preston's silence spoke volumes. How much? She asked quietly. From what I hear, about $2,000. To a man named Blackwell who rides with the Coulter gang. The blood drained from Winona's face. Everyone knew the Coulter gang outlaws who operated along the border between Arkansas and the Indian Territory. If Vernon had fled owing them money, no wonder he'd run so far and fast. The cattle will help, Preston continued, but it won't be enough to save the ranch. Then what's the point? Bitterness edged into her voice. Preston leaned forward, his eyes intent. The point, Mrs. Fairchild, is that you settle what you can honorably, then walk away clean. Start again somewhere else before Blackwell decides to collect from you what Vernon owed. The reality of her situation crashed down on Winona's shoulders. I have nowhere to go. You will. Preston stood, placing coins on the table for their coffee. Meet me at your ranch tomorrow at dawn. We'll assess the herd and make a plan. Why should I trust you? Preston paused, hat in hand. You shouldn't. Trust is earned, but right now you need allies more than you need caution. He settled his hat back on his head. Dawn, Mrs. Fairchild. The cattle won't wait, and neither will your creditors. As he walked away, Winona called after him, It's Miss Fairchild now. I'm done being Mrs. Anything. Preston turned, a hint of something like approval crossing his features. He nodded once, then pushed through the cafe door into the blinding afternoon sun. That night, Winona returned to the empty ranch house, the silence deafening after years of Vernon's constant chatter. She lit a single lamp and surveyed what remained of her life furniture they'd acquired piece by piece, kitchen tools she'd saved for, the quilt her mother had made for her wedding. In the bedroom, she pulled Vernon's clothes from the wardrobe and stuffed them into a burlap sack. Whatever sentimentality she might have felt had been burned away by the afternoon sun and the dust of his departure. By midnight, she had systematically erased every trace of Vernon Mills from the house, as if by removing his belongings, she could remove the shame of having been so thoroughly deceived. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Winona had slept little, but she'd made decisions in the darkness. If Preston Foster was offering a way out, she would take it, but on her terms. She would not be a victim again. The sound of hoofbeats announced his arrival. From the porch, she watched him approach, silhouetted against the rising sun. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Behind him followed a younger man, barely out of his teens. Miss Fairchild, Preston greeted her, dismounting. This is Daniel Cooper. Best hand with cattle I've ever known. Daniel touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Madam. Let's see what we're working with, Preston said, all business. The three rode out to the south pasture where the cattle grazed listlessly on the drought-parched grass. Winona had insisted on coming along, refusing to be excluded from decisions about her future. Thin, Preston noted, eyeing the herd critically, but salvageable. We can drive them north to better grazing for a week before heading to the railhead. The railroad pays fair prices, Winona asked. Fair enough. With 30 head, you're looking at around $600 if we're lucky. Winona's hopes sank. The mortgage alone is $500, and Jebediah Morris is owed $200 for the grazing rights, Daniel added. Plus whatever Vernon took from the merchants in town, Preston finished grimly. Winona stared out at the herd, calculations running through her mind. If I sell everything, the furniture, the wagon, my mother's silver, I might make another 100 or so. Still not enough, Preston said quietly. Then I'll find work in town. Both men exchanged glances. What? Winona demanded. Miss Fairchild, Daniel began uncomfortably. With respect, there's talk in town about Vernon's debts and about Blackwell coming to collect. I'll deal with Blackwell, she said firmly, though her heart raced at the thought. Preston shook his head. No one deals with Blackwell. Men like him see women alone as easy targets. I'm not easy, Winona snapped. Never said you were, Preston replied evenly. But facts are facts. This place isn't safe for you anymore. The truth of his words settled heavily between them. Winona looked around at the ranch she'd poured 3 years of her life into, the house she'd made a home, the land she'd come to love despite its harshness. What do you suggest? She asked finally. Sell the cattle, settle what debts you can, then come work at my place until you decide what's next. Preston's offer was delivered matter-of-factly. I need someone to manage the house. My sister did it until she married last fall and moved to Missouri. The position comes with room, board, and fair wages. Winona bristled. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's employment, Preston countered, and it gets you clear of Blackwell's reach while you figure things out. You'd hire a woman you barely know. I know enough. I know you're facing impossible odds with courage. I know you're willing to work. And I know that around here, that's rare enough to be valuable. Daniel nodded in agreement. Mr. Foster runs the cleanest operation in the territory. You'd be treated with respect. Winona considered the offer, weighing her limited options. Stay and face ruin and possibly danger from Blackwell, or accept help from this enigmatic rancher who seemed determined to offer her a chance. I'll think about it, she said finally. Preston nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. We start gathering the cattle at noon. Be ready to make your decision by then. As the men rode toward the barn to prepare for the roundup, Winona remained behind, watching the cattle graze. The life she'd known was ending, that much was clear. What wasn't clear was what would rise in its place. By noon, the cattle were gathered, a dusty, restless mass in the corral near the barn. Winona had spent the morning taking inventory of everything she owned, making hard decisions about what to keep and what to sell. When Preston found her, she was in the kitchen, wrapping her mother's silver in cloth. You've decided, he observed. I'll accept your offer of employment, Winona said, meeting his gaze directly, but I have conditions. A smile flickered across Preston's face. I'm listening. I work for fair wages, not charity. I'll manage your house, but I won't be treated as a servant, and this is temporary just until I save enough to start over somewhere else. Agreed, Preston said without hesitation. Anything else? Winona carefully placed the wrapped silver in a wooden box. Yes, I want to learn the cattle business, all of it. How to buy, sell, manage a herd. If I'm to start again, I need skills that can't be taken from me. Preston studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That can be arranged, though it won't be easy. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Foster. Preston, he corrected. If you're going to be living on my ranch, we might as well use our given names. Winona, then, she agreed. When do we leave? We drive the cattle out tomorrow at first light. Pack only what you can carry on horseback. The rest we'll sell or store in town. That evening, as Preston and Daniel prepared the herd for the drive, Winona moved through the house one last time. Each room held memories, some bitter, some sweet. In the bedroom, she opened the small jewelry box Vernon had given her on their first anniversary. Inside lay her wedding ring, removed the moment she'd returned home yesterday. Winona closed the box without taking the ring and placed it on the dresser. Let the bank have it along with everything else Vernon had left behind. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Winona wore her riding clothes, split skirt, and sturdy boots with her hair braided tightly against her neck. A single saddlebag contained her most treasured possessions: her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents, a change of clothes, and the box of silver. Preston and Daniel were already mounted when she led her horse from the barn. "Ready?" Preston asked. Winona swung into the saddle, adjusting her hat against the rising sun. "Ready." With a series of whistles and calls, the men set the cattle moving northward. Winona didn't look back as they rode away from the ranch. What lay behind belonged to a woman who no longer existed. They drove the cattle northward for 6 days, moving them to better grazing land on the edge of Preston's property, before beginning the journey to Fort Gibson. Winona insisted on taking her full share of the work, despite Preston's initial reluctance to let her take night watch alone. "I need to learn," she reminded him firmly on the third night. "You can't protect me from the reality of this life." Preston had reluctantly agreed, and Winona found herself alone under the vast starlit sky, riding the perimeter of the bedded-down herd. The work was exhausting but oddly satisfying. For the first time in years, she answered to no one but herself. On the 7th night, as they camped within a day's ride of Preston's ranch, Winona took the first watch. The cattle were settled, the night quiet except for the occasional lowing of a restless cow. She rode slowly around the herd, her body aching from days in the saddle. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her tense. She relaxed slightly when she recognized Preston's silhouette against the night sky. "Trouble?" she asked as he drew alongside her. "No, just thought you might like company." He offered her a cup of coffee from a small tin pot he'd brought. Winona accepted gratefully. The nights were growing cooler as September approached. "Thank you." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of their horses' steps the only sound. Winona found herself studying Preston's profile in the moonlight. In the week since they'd left the ranch, she'd come to appreciate his quiet competence, his lack of pretense. He was nothing like Vernon, who'd filled every silence with words that, in retrospect, had meant nothing. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. Preston took his time answering, as he did with most questions. "Doing what? Helping me, taking me in, teaching me." He looked over at her, his expression thoughtful. "My mother was left much like you were. Different circumstances, but the same result, alone with debts and few options. A neighbor helped her rebuild. I suppose I'm repaying that debt." "What happened to her?" "She remarried eventually. A good man who treated her well. They moved to California last year." A smile touched his lips. "She writes about oranges growing on trees year-round." Winona tried to imagine such abundance. "And your father, the first one, I mean." Preston's face hardened slightly. "Killed in a bar fight when I was 12, over cards and a woman who wasn't my mother." "I'm sorry," Winona said quietly. "It was a long time ago." Preston's tone made it clear the subject was closed. "Your parents?" "Fever. Both of them, the winter I turned 16. The memory still ached, though time had dulled its sharp edges. "I went to live with my aunt in St. Louis. Met Vernon at a church social when I was 20. He talked about adventure and opportunity out west." She laughed softly, the sound bitter even to her own ears. "I was so eager to escape my aunt's rules that I never questioned why a man like Vernon would want a girl with no dowry and no prospects." "You were young," Preston said, no judgment in his voice. "I was foolish." Winona sipped her coffee. "I won't be again. Preston studied her for a moment. I believe that. They completed the circuit around the herd in silence, then Preston tipped his hat. Get some rest. Daniel will take over for you in an hour. As he rode away, Winona found herself watching him longer than necessary, an unexpected warmth in her chest despite the cool night air. Preston's ranch came into view late the next afternoon, a sprawling operation that put Vernon's ambitions to shame. The main house was solid, built of timber and river stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings surrounded it, including a bunkhouse, barn, and smokehouse. Beyond stretched well-maintained pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. "Welcome to Clearwater Ranch," Preston said as they crested the final rise. Winona couldn't hide her surprise. "It's substantial," a smile touched Preston's lips. "My stepfather started it. I've added to it over the years." As they rode into the yard, 3 men emerged from the bunkhouse. Preston greeted them by name: Joseph, Emmett, and Caleb, introducing Winona as the new housekeeper. "Mrs. Fairchild will be managing the house," he explained. "You'll give her the same respect you'd give me." The men nodded, though Winona noticed curious glances exchanged between them. She straightened in her saddle, determined to establish herself immediately. "I'll need an inventory of kitchen supplies," she told them crisply, "and to know your preferences for meals." The oldest of the men, Joseph, grinned. "Yes, madam. And might I say, anything's better than Mr. Foster's cooking. We've been surviving on beans and bacon since Miss Clara left." Preston cleared his throat. "That's enough, Joseph. Show Miss Fairchild to her quarters and help her get settled." The house was spacious and well built, though in need of a woman's touch. Clara Foster's departure had clearly left the domestic side of the ranch in disarray. The kitchen was clean but disorganized, the pantry half empty, and dust had settled on surfaces throughout the house. Joseph showed Winona to a comfortable bedroom at the back of the house, overlooking a small kitchen garden gone slightly wild with neglect. "Miss Clara kept it up," he explained, seeing Winona's gaze. "None of us has much of a hand with growing things." "I do," Winona said, already planning how to revive the struggling plants. "I'll see to it tomorrow." Left alone, Winona unpacked her meager belongings. The room was simply furnished but pleasant, with a bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair near the window. Clean curtains hung at the windows, and the linen smelled of lavender, Clara's influence still lingering. She changed from her dusty riding clothes into her one good dress, washed her face, and pinned her hair up neatly. If she was to be housekeeper, she would look the part. In the kitchen, she found Preston reviewing accounts at the large table. He looked up when she entered, his expression briefly registering surprise at her transformation from trail-worn rider to composed housekeeper. "I'd like to ride into town tomorrow for supplies," she said without preamble. "The pantry needs restocking." Preston nodded. "Joseph can take you. We'll need to arrange the sale of your cattle as well. I've sent Daniel ahead to the railhead to inquire about current prices." "Thank you." Winona hesitated, then asked, "What are your expectations for meals and such?" "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at dusk," Preston replied. "Nothing fancy, but the men work hard. They need solid meals. And yourself? I'm not particular as long as it's hot and plentiful." He gestured to the papers before him. "I eat at odd hours sometimes when I'm working on the accounts." Winona nodded, already planning menus in her head. "I'll have supper ready in an hour." Preston rose. "I need to check on the new cattle. Joseph can show you where everything is." As he headed for the door, Winona called after him. "Preston," he turned, one hand on the doorframe. "Thank you for all of this." A small smile crossed his face. "You've nothing to thank me for yet, Winona. Let's see if you still feel grateful after a week of feeding 5 hungry men." The next few days established a routine. Winona rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. After they rode out, she turned her attention to bringing order to the house and reviving the kitchen garden. In the afternoons, she joined Preston or one of the hands in checking on the cattle, insisting on continuing her education in ranching. The men grew accustomed to her presence quickly, especially after the first meals she prepared. Even Preston, who rarely offered direct praise, commented that the house hadn't run so smoothly since Clara's departure. A week after her arrival, Daniel returned from Fort Gibson with news about the cattle market. "Prices are holding steady," he reported over dinner. "With 30 head, Miss Fairchild should clear around $600 as we expected." Winona nodded, mentally allocating the money to her various debts. "When do we drive them to market?" "We." Preston raised an eyebrow. "Yes, we," Winona stated firmly. "They're my cattle. I should be there for the sale." Preston studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, we'll leave in 3 days. It's a 4-day drive to Fort Gibson." That night, as Winona sat on the porch mending one of Preston's shirts, he joined her, settling into a chair with his pipe. "You've taken to ranch life well," he observed, striking a match. Winona's needle flashed in the lamplight. "I've always preferred action to idleness, and I like the rhythm of it, knowing what needs to be done and doing it." Preston smoked in silence for a while, watching as she finished with his shirt and set it aside. "What will you do after the cattle are sold?" he asked finally. Winona leaned back in her chair, considering. "Pay what debts I can, save the rest, continue working here if you'll have me." She glanced at him. "Unless you're finding me unsatisfactory." "Quite the contrary," Preston assured her. "The men are happier than I've seen them in months. The house is running smoothly, and you're learning cattle work faster than most men I've hired." "But," Winona prompted, hearing the reservation in his tone. Preston tapped his pipe against the porch rail. "But I wonder if you're setting your sights too low. A woman with your capabilities could do more than keep house for a bachelor rancher." "Such as?" "You could homestead. The government's offering land to women willing to claim it." Winona considered this. "Alone, with no capital and no protection, you wouldn't be the first woman to do it." "No," she agreed, "but I've seen how quickly dreams can turn to dust out here. I'm not opposed to starting over, but I prefer to do it from a position of strength, not desperation." Preston nodded slowly. "Wise." They sat in companionable silence as the prairie night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, the sound echoing across the open land. "Tell me about Vernon," Preston said suddenly. Winona stiffened slightly. "What do you want to know? How did a woman like you end up with a man like that?" She considered deflecting the question, but found herself answering honestly. "He was charming, full of dreams and plans. After living with my aunt's strict rules for 5 years, his talk of freedom and adventure was intoxicating." Winona sighed. "He promised me a partnership, said we'd build something together that would last generations. And you believed him?" "With all my heart." Winona's fingers twisted in her lap. "By the time I realized he was all talk and no substance, we were already out here with everything I owned invested in his schemes." "Why did you stay?" Winona met his gaze directly. "Because I made a vow. Because I thought love meant standing by someone even when they disappointed you. Because I thought he might change." She shook her head ruefully. "Foolish reasons, all of them." "Not foolish," Preston disagreed quietly. "Hopeful. There's a difference." The understanding in his voice threatened to unravel her composure. Winona stood abruptly. "It's getting late. We both have an early start tomorrow." Preston rose as well. "Of course. Good night, Winona." As she turned to go inside, he added, "For what it's worth, Vernon Mills was a fool to leave behind a woman like you." The sincerity in his words followed her into her dreams that night. 3 days later, they set out for Fort Gibson with Winona's cattle and 50 of Preston's own. Daniel and Joseph accompanied them, while Emmett and Caleb remained to manage the ranch. The drive was less arduous than Winona's first experience, the cattle more cooperative, the routine more familiar. Each evening, as they made camp, Winona took her turn with the cooking, refusing to be treated differently because she was a woman. The men accepted this without comment, though she often caught Preston watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. On the third night, as they sat around the campfire after supper, Daniel produced a harmonica and began to play a lilting tune. Joseph surprised everyone by singing along, his deep baritone carrying across the prairie. When the song ended, Preston turned to Winona. "Do you dance, Miss Fairchild?" The question caught her off guard. "I used to in St. Louis, not since coming west." Preston stood and extended his hand. "Would you care to?" Daniel immediately began playing a waltz. Winona hesitated, then placed her hand in Preston's, allowing him to draw her to her feet. Under the vast starlit sky, with only the crackling fire and Daniel's harmonica for accompaniment, they began to dance. Preston's hand was warm at her waist, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. "Where did you learn to dance?" Winona asked, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at his proximity. "My stepfather insisted, said a man should know how to move in polite society as well as on horseback." Preston's eyes reflected the firelight as he looked down at her. "I haven't had much occasion to practice in recent years." "You haven't forgotten," Winona assured him, finding herself relaxing into the familiar steps. They circled the fire, the music and the night wrapping around them. For a few precious minutes, Winona forgot about debts and betrayal, about the uncertain future awaiting her. She was simply a woman dancing under the stars with a man whose steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't known she needed. When the music ended, Preston's hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said quietly. Winona stepped back, suddenly aware of Joseph and Daniel watching them. "I should check on the horses," she murmured, needing space to collect herself. Away from the firelight, Winona pressed a hand to her flushed cheek. The attraction she felt toward Preston was undeniable and dangerous. She'd learned the hard way that trusting too quickly, feeling too deeply, led to devastation. And Preston had been clear about his motivation for helping her, repaying a debt to his mother's memory. Nothing more. Yet as she returned to the camp, she couldn't help noticing how Preston's gaze found her immediately, how his expression softened when their eyes met. It was a complication she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure she was ready to navigate. Fort Gibson bustled with activity when they arrived the next day. The railroad had transformed the once quiet military outpost into a thriving hub of commerce. Cattle pens surrounded the railhead, and buyers moved among them, assessing the stock with critical eyes. Preston handled the negotiations for both his cattle and Winona's, his reputation ensuring fair treatment. By mid-afternoon, the deal was complete. Winona's 30 head had brought $620, slightly more than expected due to their improved condition after a month of good grazing. "What now?" she asked as Preston handed her the bank draft. "We'll stay the night," he replied. "Head back in the morning. There are a few supplies I need to pick up before we return." They took rooms at the hotel near the depot, a serviceable establishment catering primarily to cattle buyers and railroad men. Winona relished the luxury of a proper bath after days on the trail, changing into her one good dress for dinner. When she descended to the hotel dining room, she found Preston waiting, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes. He stood as she approached, an appreciative look crossing his face. "You clean up well, Miss Fairchild," he said with a small smile. "As do you, Mr. Foster," she returned, taking the seat he offered. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant: roast beef with vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. They talked easily about the cattle sale, the ranch, books they'd read. For a few hours, Winona allowed herself to imagine this was normal, sharing a meal with a man who respected her, whose company she genuinely enjoyed. As coffee was served, Preston's expression grew serious. "There's something I need to discuss with you." Winona tensed. "Yes, I received word while you were settling in. Blackwell was seen in Fort Smith, asking questions about Vernon and about you." The warmth of the evening evaporated instantly. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he doesn't believe Vernon left empty-handed." Preston's voice was grim. "He thinks you know where money is hidden." Fear coiled in Winona's stomach. "There is no money. Vernon took everything. I believe you, but Blackwell won't." Winona set her coffee cup down carefully. "What do I do?" "For now, you stay at Clearwater. It's well outside his usual territory, and I have enough men to discourage casual threats." Preston hesitated. "But eventually, you may need to consider moving further west, or north, perhaps." The thought of leaving the relative safety she'd found at Preston's ranch filled Winona with dread. "I see." Preston reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly. "Don't worry about it tonight. We'll figure it out when we return." Winona nodded, though her appetite had vanished. The reminder of Vernon's betrayal and its continuing consequences cast a shadow over the remainder of the evening. That night, as Winona prepared for bed, a knock at her door startled her. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders before opening it a crack. Preston stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. "May I speak with you? It's important." Winona hesitated, then nodded, opening the door wider but remaining in the doorway. "Daniel just returned from the saloon," Preston said quietly. "Blackwell is here in Fort Gibson. He arrived on this evening's train from Fort Smith." Cold fear washed over Winona. "Does he know we're here?" "It's likely. A cattle sale isn't exactly inconspicuous." Preston's jaw tightened. "We need to leave. Now. Now, in the dark. It's safer than waiting until morning when he can easily intercept us." Winona nodded, understanding the urgency. "Give me 5 minutes." She dressed quickly, gathering her few possessions into her saddlebag. When she emerged, Preston, Daniel, and Joseph were waiting, their expressions grim. "The horses are ready," Preston informed her. "We'll take the north trail out of town, then circle back toward Clearwater once we're sure we're not being followed." They slipped out through the hotel's back entrance and mounted up, keeping to side streets until they reached the edge of town. The moon was high, providing enough light to navigate the trail that wound through the wooded hills north of Fort Gibson. They rode in tense silence, Preston in the lead with Winona close behind, Daniel and Joseph bringing up the rear. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf set Winona's nerves on edge. The fear she'd suppressed since learning of Vernon's debts now surged to the surface, making her hands tremble on the reins. They had ridden for perhaps an hour when the sound of approaching riders reached them. Preston signaled for a halt, his hand moving to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Get off the trail," he whispered urgently. "Into the trees. Now." They guided their horses into the dense forest that bordered the trail, ducking low branches as they sought cover. Winona's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give away their position. Minutes later, 3 riders passed by on the trail, moving at a steady pace. In the moonlight, Winona caught a glimpse of the lead rider, a tall man with a distinctive black hat and duster. Something in his posture, the way he controlled his horse, sent a chill down her spine. Blackwell, Preston murmured beside her, confirming her suspicion. They remained motionless until the sounds of the riders faded completely. Only then did Preston signal for them to continue, guiding them deeper into the forest rather than returning to the trail. "We'll circle around," he explained quietly. "Take the old Cherokee path back toward Clearwater. It's longer but less traveled." The rest of the night passed in a blur of vigilance and exhaustion. Dawn found them emerging from the forest onto the open prairie, miles from Fort Gibson and any sign of pursuit. Only then did Winona feel her muscles begin to unclench, her breathing slow to something approaching normal. Preston dropped back to ride beside her. "You're holding up well," he observed. Winona managed a tired smile. "I'm not sure I have any choice." "There's always a choice. You could have collapsed into hysterics hours ago." "Is that what you expected?" "Not of you." Preston's gaze was warm with respect. "I've yet to see you falter, Winona Fairchild, no matter what's thrown at you." The compliment settled around her like a blanket, chasing away some of the night's chill. "How far to Clearwater?" she asked. 2 days at this pace." "We'll rest the horses at midday, make camp at dusk." Preston studied her face. "Will you be all right?" Winona straightened in the saddle. "I will be." And somehow, despite the danger behind them and the uncertainty ahead, she believed it. They reached Clearwater Ranch without further incident, though Preston insisted on posting a night watch for the first week after their return. Winona threw herself back into her duties, finding comfort in the routine of daily tasks. Yet beneath the surface, anxiety simmered. Blackwell remained a threat, one that could materialize at any moment. As September gave way to October, the first hint of autumn crept across the prairie. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler. Winona's role at the ranch expanded beyond housekeeping, as she proved her worth in other areas, helping with the accounts, assisting at roundup, even breaking a gentle mare that Preston had acquired for ranch use. One evening, as Winona sat on the porch shelling peas for the next day's dinner, Preston joined her with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "You look like you could use this," he said, pouring a small amount into each glass and handing one to her. Winona accepted it with a raised eyebrow. "Is there an occasion, of sorts?" Preston settled into the chair beside her. "It's been 2 months since you arrived. I thought we might acknowledge that milestone." Winona sipped the whiskey, letting it warm her throat. "Has it been that long already? Does it feel longer or shorter?" She considered the question. "Both, somehow. Some days it feels as though I've always been here. Others, it seems impossible that so much has changed in so little time." Preston nodded in understanding. "Life has a way of appending itself when we least expect it." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "I received a letter today," Preston said finally, "from the sheriff in Fort Smith." Winona tensed. "About Blackwell, about Vernon, actually." Preston took a drink from his glass. "He's dead." The words landed like stones in still water. Winona set her glass down carefully. "How?" "Shot in a gambling dispute in Wichita. The sheriff thought you should know." A complex knot of emotions tangled in Winona's chest: shock, grief for what might have been, relief that a chapter had definitively closed. "I'm sorry," Preston said quietly. "Don't be," Winona replied, surprised to find she meant it. "Vernon made his choices, I've made mine." Preston studied her face in the fading light. "You're not mourning him." It wasn't a question, but Winona answered anyway. "I mourned the man I thought he was months ago, the man he actually was." She shook her head. "No, I won't mourn him. And Blackwell will still want his money." Winona picked up her glass again, needing its warmth. "Vernon's death doesn't change that." Preston's expression hardened. "No, but it changes something else." With Vernon confirmed dead, As his widow, you're now legally entitled to file a claim of abandonment and retain full ownership of whatever property remains." Winona's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "The ranch is yours to sell or keep as you see fit," Preston confirmed. "Though I imagine the bank has already foreclosed." "Probably," Winona agreed. "Still, it's something. A legal end, at least." They fell silent again, each lost in thought as darkness settled around them. The whiskey had brought a flush to Winona's cheeks, a pleasant warmth that spread through her limbs. "What will you do now?" Preston asked finally. Winona looked out at the darkening prairie. "I don't know. Continue working here if you'll have me. Save my wages, eventually." She hesitated. "Eventually, I'd like land of my own again, something no one can take from me." Preston nodded slowly. "A worthy goal. And you?" Winona turned to look at him. "What do you want, Preston Foster?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stared into his glass for a long moment before answering. "Peace, I suppose. The satisfaction of building something lasting. Good cattle, good land, good people around me." He glanced at her. "Simple things, really." "Not simple at all," Winona disagreed softly. "Those are the hardest things to find and keep." Preston's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them in the growing darkness. Then he stood, collecting their glasses. "It's getting late, and we both have an early start tomorrow." Winona rose as well, aware of his proximity, of the subtle shift in the air between them. "Preston." Before she could continue, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Preston moved immediately to the edge of the porch, hand going to the pistol at his hip. Winona tensed, fear racing along her spine at the thought that Blackwell might have found her. Relief washed over her as Daniel's voice called out a greeting, identifying the riders as ranch hands returning from a neighboring property. Preston's shoulders relaxed, though his expression remained thoughtful as he turned back to her. "We'll continue this conversation another time," he said quietly. "Good night, Winona." As he walked away, Winona remained on the porch, the memory of unsaid words lingering in the night air. The next morning brought unexpected news. A rider from Fort Smith delivered a letter addressed to Winona, a formal notice from the bank regarding her former property. Due to Vernon's confirmed death and the foreclosure process already underway, they were offering her a small settlement, $200, in recognition of improvements made to the property during her residence. "It's not much," Preston commented after she shared the contents with him, "but it's something." Winona folded the letter carefully. "It's enough to give me options, combined with my wages and what remains from the cattle sale." "You could make a start elsewhere," Preston finished, his expression unreadable. "I could," Winona agreed, watching him closely. "Is that what you think I should do?" Preston busied himself with the account book open on the table between them. "It's not my place to say what you should do, Winona." Frustration flared within her. For weeks, something had been building between them, glances that lingered, conversations that edged toward deeper waters before retreating. Yet Preston maintained a careful distance, never quite crossing the invisible line from employer to something more. "Isn't it?" she challenged softly. "After everything we've been through together." Preston looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "What are you asking me, Winona?" "I'm asking if you want me to stay." She met his gaze directly. "Not as your housekeeper, not as someone you're helping out of obligation or kindness, but as..." The door opened suddenly as Joseph entered, unaware of the charged moment he'd interrupted. "Mr. Foster, the buyers from Kansas City are here to look at those yearlings." Preston hesitated, his eyes still locked with Winona's. Then he nodded, rising from the table. "I'll be right there." As he moved to leave, he paused beside Winona's chair. "This conversation isn't finished," he said quietly. "We'll talk tonight." The day crawled by, each task taking twice as long as Winona's mind drifted repeatedly to the interrupted conversation. By evening, her nerves were stretched thin with anticipation and uncertainty. Had she been too forward? Misread his interest. The possibility of rejection loomed large, yet the alternative continuing in this limbo of unspoken feelings had become unbearable. When Preston still hadn't returned by supper time, Winona fed the hands and left a plate warming by the stove for him. As darkness fell, she found herself once again on the porch, watching the path that led from the north pasture where Preston had taken the cattle buyers. The sound of a single horse approaching brought her to her feet. Preston dismounted wearily in the yard, leading his horse toward the barn. When he emerged minutes later, he spotted her on the porch and hesitated before climbing the steps to join her. "The buyers stayed longer than expected," he explained, removing his hat. "We closed the deal, though. 30 yearlings at top price." "Congratulations," Winona said, searching his face for some indication of his thoughts. Preston nodded, then gestured toward the door. "Your supper's inside. I left it warming. I'm not hungry." He looked exhausted, she noticed, with lines of tension around his mouth. "Preston, about this morning I've been thinking about what you said," he interrupted, his voice low and measured. "About whether I want you to stay." Winona's heart thundered in her chest, and Preston took a step closer. "I do want you to stay, Winona. More than I've wanted anything in a very long time." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "But not if staying means you're giving up your dreams of independence. Not if it's because you feel obligated or grateful." Relief and joy washed through her, followed quickly by indignation. "Do you think so little of me? That I would make such a decision out of obligation?" "No," Preston said quickly. "No, I think the world of you. That's why I need to be sure you're choosing me for the right reasons." Winona closed the distance between them. "Preston Foster, I have spent the last 3 months learning who I am without a man defining me. I've discovered my own strength, my own worth. And yes, you helped create the circumstances for that discovery, but the journey was mine." She placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong beneath her palm. "I'm not choosing to stay because I'm grateful or obligated or afraid to be alone. I'm choosing to stay because somewhere between that first cup of coffee in Fort Smith and tonight, I fell in love with you." The declaration hung in the air between them, bold and irrevocable. For one terrible moment, Preston remained silent, his expression unreadable. Then his hands came up to frame her face, gentle as a prairie breeze. "I've been falling in love with you since I watched you stand in the dust of your husband's departure and refuse to break," he said softly. "But I was afraid to say it, afraid you'd think I was taking advantage of your situation." Winona smiled, years of caution and hurt falling away in the warmth of his confession. "I'm not in that situation anymore. I have options now, choices, and I'm choosing you." Preston's lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the connection between them. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Winona Fairchild. And I want to build a life with you not as my housekeeper or employee, but as my partner in everything." "I want that too," Winona whispered, "more than I ever thought possible again." Later that night, as they sat before the fire in the ranch house parlor, plans and dreams spilling forth after months of careful restraint, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Daniel entered, his expression grave. "Riders coming, Mr. Foster. 6 of them, moving fast." Preston was on his feet instantly. "Get the men, rifles at the ready." Winona felt the blood drain from her face. Blackwell, Preston's jaw tightened. Possibly. Stay inside, Winona. No, she stood firmly beside him. I won't hide, this is my fight too. After a moment's hesitation, Preston nodded. Stay behind me then. On the porch, the ranch hands had taken defensive positions, rifles trained on the approaching riders now visible in the moonlight. Winona's heart pounded as she recognized the lead rider, the same man she'd glimpsed on the trail from Fort Gibson. Blackwell. The riders pulled up in the yard, Blackwell raising his hand to halt his men from advancing further. In the lamplight spilling from the house, his features came into focus hard, weathered with cold eyes that assessed the armed men on the porch before settling on Winona. Mrs. Mills, he called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. I believe we have some unfinished business. Preston stepped forward, his rifle steady. The lady's name is Fairchild, and she has no business with you. Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's where you're wrong, Foster. Her husband owed me $2,000. I aim to collect. Vernon Mills is dead, Preston replied. And his debts died with him. Not in my book. Blackwell's gaze shifted back to Winona. I know he left something for you, Mrs. Mills. Some insurance against a rainy day. I want what's mine. Winona moved to stand beside Preston. He left nothing. He took everything when he ran, including money that wasn't his to take. I paid his legitimate debts as far as I was able, but I owe you nothing. Blackwell's expression hardened. I don't think you understand your situation, madam. I'm not leaving without my money. And we're not giving you what we don't have, Preston countered. You're outnumbered, Blackwell. Take your men and ride out while you still can. Tension crackled in the air as Blackwell assessed his options, his men shifting uneasily behind him. Finally, he spat into the dust. This isn't over, Foster. The lady's debt remains. I'll be back when your guns aren't so close at hand. Preston's aim didn't waver. You come back, you're a dead man. Spread the word Winona Fairchild is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her answers to me and every man on this ranch. Something in Preston's tone, the absolute certainty, the deadly promise gave Blackwell pause. His gaze traveled over the armed men on the porch, the solid ranch house, the determined set of Winona's shoulders. Ain't worth dying over, he muttered finally. But remember this, Mrs. Mills. Frontier justice has a long memory. With that, he wheeled his horse around and signaled his men to follow. They rode away into the darkness, dust rising behind them like ghosts in the moonlight. Winona released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Preston's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her against him. He'll be back, she said quietly. Maybe, Preston conceded, but not tonight, and not alone next time. Inside, once the men had returned to the bunkhouse and the house was secure, Winona sank into a chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her suddenly exhausted. I can't keep living like this, she said. Always looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to appear. Preston knelt before her, taking her hands in his. You won't have to. There's a U.S. Marshal in Fort Smith who's been building a case against the Coulter gang for months. Blackwell's a known associate. I'll wire the marshal tomorrow, inform him of tonight's visit. Hope flickered in Winona's chest. Will that be enough? It's a start. Preston squeezed her hands gently, and in the meantime we'll be prepared, together. The word held such promise that Winona felt tears sting her eyes. Together, she echoed. The next morning, Preston rode to Fort Smith to wire the marshal and formalize the sale of Winona's former ranch. While he was gone, Winona focused on the day-to-day operations of Clearwater, finding comfort in the familiar routine. She was in the kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes when Joseph approached with news. Rider coming, Miss Fairchild. just one from the direction of Fort Smith. Winona straightened, shielding her eyes against the midday sun. "Preston," Joseph shook his head. "Not Mr. Foster, stranger." Anxiety rippled through her. "Get Daniel and Emmett, just in case." By the time the rider reached the yard, the three ranch hands had positioned themselves strategically around the house. Winona stood on the porch, a rifle within reach though out of sight behind the door. The rider dismounted a middle-aged man in a well-worn suit, his demeanor official rather than threatening. He removed his hat as he approached the porch. "Mrs. Fairchild." "My name is Thomas Wainwright, attorney at law from Fort Smith." Winona's wariness didn't diminish. "What brings you to Clearwater, Mr. Wainwright?" "A matter regarding your late husband's estate." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather portfolio. "May we speak privately?" Winona hesitated, then nodded to Joseph, who retreated to a respectful distance but remained within sight. She invited Wainwright onto the porch but not into the house, maintaining a careful boundary. "What estate?" she asked as they settled into the porch chairs. "Vernon left nothing but debts." Wainwright opened the portfolio. "That's what makes this matter unusual, Mrs. Fairchild. It seems your husband purchased a life insurance policy shortly before your marriage. $5,000, payable to his wife upon his death." Shock rendered Winona momentarily speechless. "That's impossible," she finally managed. "Vernon could barely keep up with the ranch mortgage, let alone an insurance policy." "Nevertheless, the policy exists and has been maintained." Wainwright passed her a document. "The premiums were paid regularly from an account in St. Louis. The company has verified the policy's validity and is prepared to pay the claim, pending your signature on these forms." Winona stared at the document, disbelief warring with suspicion. "This makes no sense. Vernon never mentioned insurance." "Many men don't," Wainwright said diplomatically. "They consider it tempting fate." A thought occurred to Winona. "How did you find me? I no longer use the name Mills." "Mr. Foster contacted our office regarding the deed transfer for your former property," Wainwright explained. "When I saw the name, I connected it to the insurance claim that had been forwarded to me." Still skeptical, Winona examined the document more closely. It appeared legitimate. Vernon's signature matched the one she knew. The company was reputable. The dates aligned with their courtship. "I'll need to discuss this with Mr. Foster before signing anything," she said finally. Wainwright nodded. "Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel in Fort Smith for the next week. You can send word when you're ready to proceed." He hesitated, then added, "If I may say so, Mrs. Fairchild, this is a substantial sum, enough to give you a fresh start should you desire one." The implication wasn't lost on Winona. $5,000 was indeed life-changing money in the West, enough to buy land, build a home, stock a small ranch of her own. The independence she'd been working toward could be hers almost immediately. After Wainwright departed, Winona sat alone on the porch, turning this unexpected development over in her mind. If the insurance policy was legitimate and she still harbored doubts, it represented both opportunity and complication. What would Preston think? Would he see it as a chance for her to pursue her dreams, or as a threat to their newly acknowledged feelings? Preston returned late that afternoon, his expression brightening when he saw her waiting on the porch. As he dismounted, Winona couldn't help noticing how naturally he belonged in this setting, strong, capable, at home on the land he loved. "You look deep in thought," he observed, climbing the steps to join her. Winona nodded, then shared Wainwright's visit and the unexpected news of the insurance policy. As she spoke, Preston's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "You believe it's legitimate?" he asked when she'd finished. "I don't know," Winona admitted. It seems unlike Vernon to think so far ahead, yet the documentation appears authentic. Preston leaned against the porch rail. What will you do if it is real? $5,000 is a considerable sum. The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Winona rose from her chair to stand before him, meeting his gaze directly. "That depends on us," she said simply. "On what we want to build together." Relief softened Preston's features. "You're still thinking of staying, then?" "Even with the means to go anywhere, do anything?" Winona reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "Preston, I meant what I said last night. I love you. Money doesn't change that." He drew her closer. "And I meant what I said about being partners. If this policy is real, the money is yours to use as you see fit. Whether that's investing in Clearwater or starting something new elsewhere, I'll support your decision." The generosity of his response moved Winona deeply. "What if I wanted both? To stay with you and to build something of my own?" Preston's brow furrowed in confusion. "Both. The parcel that borders Clearwater to the east, the old Henderson place. You mentioned it was for sale." Winona's eyes shone with growing excitement. "What if I purchased it? We could combine operations, expand the herd, maybe even breed horses like you've talked about." Understanding dawned on Preston's face, followed by a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You want to be my business partner as well as my life partner?" "I want us to build something together," Winona confirmed. "Something neither of us could create alone. Isn't that what you said you wanted? Something lasting." Preston pulled her into his arms, his kiss an answer more eloquent than words. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Winona Fairchild, you continue to amaze me." The following week brought confirmation of the insurance policy's legitimacy. With Preston beside her, Winona signed the necessary papers in Wainwright's Fort Smith office, still somewhat stunned by this final, unexpected gift from a man who had otherwise brought her only heartache. "What will you do with the money?" Wainwright inquired as he handed her the bank draft. Winona exchanged a glance with Preston before answering. "Invest in the future, Mr. Wainwright. In land and cattle and a life worth building." Their first stop after leaving Wainwright's office was the land office, where Winona purchased the Henderson property adjoining Clearwater Ranch. Their next was the sheriff's office, where Preston introduced Winona to U.S. Marshal James Cooper. "Mrs. Fairchild," Cooper greeted her, his handshake firm. "Mr. Foster has told me about your situation with Blackwell and the Coulter gang. Can you help?" Winona asked directly. Cooper's weathered face was serious. "I've been building a case against them for months. Your testimony about Blackwell's threats could be valuable." He glanced at the bank draft still in Winona's hand. "Though I see you've come into some funds, that might complicate matters." Preston frowned. "How so?" "If Blackwell learns of the insurance money, he may believe it vindicates his suspicions about Vernon Mills hiding assets," Cooper explained. "It could make Mrs. Fairchild an even more tempting target." Winona felt a chill despite the warm office. "What should I do?" "Deposit that draft immediately," Cooper advised. "Then keep your financial affairs private. Meanwhile, I'll increase patrols near Clearwater and continue building my case against the gang." As they left the marshal's office, Preston's arm around Winona's shoulders was protective, reassuring. "We'll be careful," he promised. "And Cooper is good at his job. It's only a matter of time before Blackwell and the others face justice." Winona nodded, refusing to let fear overshadow this day of new beginnings. "In the meantime, we have a ranch to expand and a future to plan." The rest of autumn passed in a flurry of activity as they integrated the Henderson property into Clearwater operations. The combined ranch now stretched over 6,000 acres of prime grazing land, with ample water from the creek that gave Clearwater its name. Winona proved to have a natural head for business, her careful accounting and strategic planning complementing Preston's practical experience with the land and cattle. As winter approached, Preston began making improvements to the main house, adding a larger kitchen, expanding the parlor, building new shelves for Winona's growing collection of books. The changes reflected their shared vision of a home that would endure, a place where future generations might gather. "You think Blackwell has given up?" Winona asked one evening as they sat before the fire, going over the ranch accounts. Preston considered the question. "Not given up. Delayed, perhaps. Cooper's increased presence in the territory has made the Coulter gang more cautious. But men like Blackwell don't forget what they believe they're owed." Winona sighed, setting aside the ledger. "Sometimes I feel like Vernon's ghost will never leave us in peace." Preston took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "One day this will all be behind us, just a story we tell about how we found each other." The conviction in his voice warmed Winona more than the fire. "I hope you're right." December brought snow to the prairie, transforming Clearwater into a landscape of pristine white. Christmas approached, and Winona found herself swept up in preparations, baking cookies with recipes Clara had left behind, making small gifts for the ranch hands, decorating the house with pine boughs and red ribbons. On Christmas Eve, as they returned from delivering baskets to neighboring ranches, Preston guided their sleigh to a stop on a rise overlooking the combined properties. In the late afternoon light, Clearwater stretched before them, peaceful and perfect beneath its blanket of snow. "It's beautiful," Winona said softly, her breath misting in the cold air. Preston reached into his coat pocket. "I have something for you. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but—" He withdrew a small wooden box and placed it in her gloved hands. "This seems like the right moment." Winona opened the box with fingers that suddenly trembled. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Preston," she breathed. "I know we've already declared our feelings," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But I want to make it official. I want to marry you, Winona Fairchild, if you'll have me." Joy bloomed in Winona's chest, bright and fierce as summer lightning. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston Foster, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. When they parted, Winona laughed, a sound of pure happiness that echoed across the snow-covered prairie. "What's so amusing?" Preston asked, smiling at her joy. "Life," Winona replied, nestling against him as he snapped the reins to start the horses moving again. "How it brings us exactly where we need to be, even when we're fighting against it with everything we have." Preston's arm tightened around her. "Wise words from the future Mrs. Foster." "Winona Fairchild Foster," she corrected. "I'm keeping both names, a reminder of where I've been and where I'm going." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Preston agreed. "Just as you are is exactly who I love." As the sleigh carried them home through the gathering dusk, Winona reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the dust of abandonment to the promise of a future brighter than anything she could have imagined. The path had been difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but every step had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life they were building together. The ranch house came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light against the darkening sky. Behind them, their tracks in the snow marked the way they had come. Ahead lay their future, unwritten but full of possibility. And somewhere between past and future, in the perfect present of this moment, Winona found herself exactly where she belonged. They married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the Clearwater Ranch parlor with Marshall Cooper officiating, and the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Winona wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from St. Louis, while Preston surprised her by appearing in a new suit rather than his usual ranch attire. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows a promise to face whatever came next together. Spring brought new life to the expanded ranch, calves in the pastures, foals in the newly established horse breeding program, and, to the couple's joy, the news that Winona was expecting their first child. A son to inherit Clearwater, Preston mused one evening as they sat on the porch, his hand resting gently on Winona's still flat stomach. Winona laughed. Or a daughter who'll run it better than either of us could imagine. The months passed peacefully, the threat of Blackwell receding as Marshal Cooper's net around the Coulter gang tightened. By late summer, when Winona's pregnancy had progressed enough to be visible beneath her dresses, news reached them that several gang members had been arrested near Fort Gibson, though Blackwell himself remained at large. He'll surface eventually, Cooper assured them during a visit to Clearwater. Men like him always do. Autumn painted the prairie in gold and crimson, and Clearwater prospered under the combined leadership of Preston and Winona. The first frost had just touched the land when a rider arrived from Fort Smith with an urgent message from Cooper. "Blackwell's been spotted," Preston told Winona after reading the marshal's note. "Near the old Henderson place. Cooper thinks he's watching the ranch, planning something." Fear tightened around Winona's heart, her hand instinctively going to her rounded belly. "What do we do?" Preston's expression was grim. "Cooper's gathering a posse. They'll be here by nightfall. In the meantime, we prepare." The ranch hands were alerted, rifles distributed, watch schedules established. As darkness fell, Cooper arrived with 6 deputies, their presence both reassuring and a stark reminder of the danger lurking beyond the ranch's boundaries. "We'll surround the property," Cooper explained as they gathered in the parlor. "If Blackwell approaches, we'll take him." Preston nodded, his arm around Winona's shoulders. "And if he doesn't, then we flush him out," Cooper replied, his determination evident. "One way or another, this ends now. Mrs. Foster deserves to welcome her child in peace." That night, as Winona prepared for bed, Preston checked and rechecked the locks on every door and window. His vigilance both comforted and concerned her. "Come to bed," she called softly. "You need rest as much as I do." Preston joined her, though she knew he wouldn't sleep deeply with the threat so close. As they lay in the darkness, his hand found hers beneath the quilt. "I won't let anything happen to you or our child," he promised. "Not while there's breath in my body." Winona squeezed his hand. "I know. But remember what you told me months ago. We face this together. I'm not the same woman who watched her husband ride away in a cloud of dust. I won't break, no matter what comes." Preston's lips brushed her forehead. "No, you won't. It's one of the countless reasons I love you." Dawn broke clear and cold, the prairie frost covered and silent. Cooper and his deputies reported no sign of Blackwell during the night. As the morning progressed, tension gave way to cautious optimism. Perhaps Blackwell had realized he was outnumbered and retreated. Midday brought a wagon from Fort Smith with supplies Cooper had requested. As the deputies unloaded provisions, Winona busied herself preparing coffee and sandwiches for the men. Preston remained vigilant, dividing his attention between the activity in the yard and the open prairie beyond. The shot came without warning, a single rifle crack that shattered the relative calm. One of Cooper's deputies crumpled to the ground, blood blossoming on his shirt. "Inside." "Now," Preston shouted, pulling Winona toward the house as Cooper and the remaining deputies scrambled for cover. From the shelter of the porch, Cooper peered toward the distant tree line. "There," he muttered. "Western Ridge, single shooter." Blackwell, Preston confirmed grimly. Cooper nodded. Must be bold move even for him. He's desperate, Winona said from the doorway. He knows you're closing in. Another shot rang out, splintering wood near Cooper's head. The marshal ducked, then signaled to his deputies to spread out and approach the ridge from different directions. Stay inside, he ordered Preston and Winona. We'll handle this. Preston hesitated, clearly torn between protecting his wife and helping capture the man who threatened their peace. Winona made the decision for him. Go, she said firmly. End this. I'll be safe in the house with Joseph. After a moment's deliberation, Preston nodded, retrieving his rifle from its place near the door. Lock everything behind me. Don't open up for anyone but me or Cooper. As the men disappeared into the landscape, moving with the careful precision of experienced trackers, Winona secured the house with Joseph's help. The young ranch hand positioned himself near a window, rifle ready, his usual easygoing expression replaced by solemn determination. Mr. Foster will get him, Miss Winona, Joseph assured her. Don't you worry. But worry she did, pacing the parlor as minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The baby shifted restlessly within her, responding to her anxiety. Winona placed a hand on her belly, murmuring soothing words she didn't fully believe. The sound of approaching horses finally broke the tense silence. Winona rushed to the window, relief washing over her as she recognized Preston among the returning men. But her relief turned to fresh concern when she saw the grim set of his features and the bloodstain on his sleeve. She opened the door as they reached the porch, her eyes immediately finding Preston's. You're hurt. Just a graze, he assured her, though the tightness around his mouth suggested more pain than he admitted. It's over, Winona. Blackwell's dead. The finality of those words took a moment to register. Dead. How? Cooper stepped forward, his expression somber. He refused to surrender. Fired on my deputies even when he was cornered. We had no choice. Winona nodded, understanding the necessity even as she felt a complex mixture of relief and regret that it had ended in bloodshed. And your man, the one who was shot, he'll live, Cooper replied. Shoulder wound, painful but not fatal. That evening, after the wounded had been tended and statements taken, Cooper and his deputies departed with Blackwell's body bound for Fort Smith. The ranch settled into an uneasy quiet, the day's violence lingering like smoke in the air. Preston found Winona in the nursery they'd been preparing, her hands smoothing the quilt on the small crib he'd built himself. Are you all right? He asked softly. Winona turned to face him, her expression reflective. I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Last December I was alone, betrayed, with nothing but debts and broken dreams. She gestured around the room. Now I have this, you, our child, a future. Preston crossed the room to gather her in his arms, careful of both his wounded arm and her pregnant belly. And no more ghosts from the past to haunt us. No more ghosts, Winona agreed, resting her head against his chest. Just the life we're building together. 2 weeks before Christmas, as the prairie lay blanketed in snow, Winona gave birth to a son they named James Thomas Foster. With his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, he entered the world loudly announcing his presence. A new beginning for the family and for Clearwater Ranch. As Winona held her son in the quiet of their bedroom, Preston sitting beside them with wonder and pride illuminating his features, she reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her here. From the dust and despair of abandonment to the joy of this moment, a journey she could never have imagined when she watched Vernon ride away that scorching day in Fort Smith. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, his finger gently tracing their son's tiny cheek. Winona smiled, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. I'm thinking that sometimes what feels like an ending is really just the beginning of something better than we could have dreamed. Preston leaned forward to press a kiss to her forehead. I'm grateful every day that I sat down beside you in that cafe and said, let's start again. So am I, Winona whispered, the words a promise and a prayer of thanksgiving for second chances and the courage to take them. Outside, snow began to fall gently, covering the tracks of the past and preparing a clean slate for whatever adventures awaited the Foster family in the years to come. Clearwater Ranch stood strong against the winter wind, a testament to what could be built from the ashes of what was lost. And in the warm heart of that home, Winona Fairchild Foster held the future in her arms and knew, with absolute certainty, that she had found exactly where she belonged.